Today, I want to talk about a huge responsibility we have here in the Senate and a great opportunity that lies before us. You know, the Senate is asked to confirm nominees, both for executive branch appointments and for judicial branch appointments. And we've heard a lot of great debate here on the Senate floor over the past year and a half over some of these nominees. We've been able to confirm Justice Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, who I believe is doing a superb job. And that was quite a debate here. We've, in the meantime, been able to confirm a number of circuit court judges, some district court judges, executive branch appointments, and those are all important. But once again, we are asked to do something that is perhaps our most important task, which is to look at filling another opening on the United States Supreme Court. There are only 9 of these justices, of course, and this is a lifetime appointment. And what the district court does and the circuit court does, it all kind of comes up to this one court. Our founders created this court to be able to have a place where people could get a fair hearing, where you would have a dispassionate look at whether what we pass here fits within the Constitution, whether laws are being properly interpreted. These are hard issues and tough issues. You want the right people there to do it. And once again, because of an opening that's occurred on the Supreme Court, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to step up as a body and do that. In this case, we are asked to fill the seat of Justice Kennedy, who is viewed by many as being an important player in the court because he was often the swing vote. He's a thoughtful guy. And I think we're very fortunate in that one of his law clerks, one of Justice Kennedy's law clerks, has been nominated by the president, has agreed to step forward for this confirmation process to be an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, to fill that 9th spot. My hope is that this can be done in a way where we have an honest and spirited but fact-driven debate here on the floor of the United States Senate. And I just got to tell you, I'm probably a little biased in this case because I know this nominee personally. And I think a lot of him, not just as a judge, where he's got an amazing record on the second highest court in the land, but also as a person. This is the 3rd time I've come to the Senate floor to talk about him because I feel so strongly and I want to be sure that he gets a fair shake. I think as American people get to know him better, he will see a lot of support around the country for his confirmation because people see he's the kind of person that they would want to have representing them and their family, their children on the Supreme Court. I worked with him in the George W. Bush White House. He had a job there, we'll talk about in a second, called Staff Secretary, which is a job where you are responsible for being the traffic cop, basically, for the Oval Office. So documents that go into the Oval Office and come out of the Oval Office go through that office. It's not a substantive job in that sense, but it is an important job to a president to have somebody who he trusts to be able to decide what he looks at, what he doesn't look at, and how his material is then distributed out. So he's someone who became close to President George W. Bush, and George W. Bush is, as he has said many times publicly and to me and others privately, thinks the world of him. Got to know him very well. So I know Brett Kavanaugh more as a person, as a friend, as a father, as a husband, but his legal background is incredibly impressive. And I don't think anybody's better qualified to serve on the Supreme Court based on his legal background and his judicial philosophy. I know some of my colleagues have now met with him as well. I'm told that as of yesterday, 49 of the 51 Republicans who were here in the Senate have now met with Judge Kavanaugh. I'm glad to hear that. And by the way, the reactions have been very positive. I've talked to most of my colleagues about their meetings with him, and a number of them have gone out of their way to speak publicly about how impressed they were with him and his demeanor and his background and his character. I'm also pleased to hear that several of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have now met with Judge Kavanaugh as well. I think that's really important. I know that this is a partisan town these days, and it's tough to get things done, but in this case, I would hope that more of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle agree to sit down with him and talk to him. I think he needs to have the ability to talk one-on-one to some people who perhaps don't know him well based on some of the comments that I've seen about him, and I think that he could put some of their concerns to rest. For some, that may not be possible. Maybe they have philosophical differences with his approach to the law. I get that, but I hope that they will take the opportunity to sit down with him and talk to him. The Supreme Court's going to be faced with a lot of tough issues, and this needs to be a serious consideration. I'm pleased that we are taking it seriously. And some have said, boy, this is going too fast. I will just tell you the amount of time between when he was nominated and when his hearing will be, which I think is scheduled now for the week of September 4th. That is more time than elapsed during the previous few Supreme Court nominations. So Justice Kagan, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Ginsburg, Neil Gorsuch, who I talked about a minute ago. So there has been adequate time here relative to other confirmations. Second, some of my colleagues on this side of the aisle are saying they want more documents to review his nomination. Now, I would just make this point. More documents have been produced with regard to Judge Kavanaugh than any other Supreme Court nomination in history. That's what I'm told by the Judiciary Committee. Some Democrats have suggested they need to review the literally millions of documents that passed through his office and passed through his desk when he held this job we talked about earlier as Staff Secretary for President George W. Bush. Again, this is a job that's sort of like the traffic cop, not to be substantively giving the President the document from an agency or department or another White House policy office, but rather to provide that document to the President in a timely way to be sure the President's seeing the right documents, be sure that there's coordination. It's the flow of the documents. So I think seeing all those documents are not relevant, frankly, to the confirmation process because they don't relate to him. What they do relate to, obviously, are a lot of things that have to do with President George W. Bush, including, I'm sure, some very personal documents where the President would write in the margins and so on, and I'm sure that'd be interesting for people to look at. Probably somebody could write a book about some of those things. But that's not the purpose here. And that's why I think it is somewhat of a fishing expedition to say, let's see these millions of documents that just passed through this guy's desk, particularly in the context of a confirmation where more documents are being provided than any previous confirmation. I was told by the Judiciary Committee this morning that 430,000 pages of documents are being produced. 430,000 pages of documents. I don't know how many of my colleagues are going to read through 430,000 pages of documents, but they're free to do so. By the way, this compares to 170,000 pages of documents that were produced with regard to now Justice, then former Solicitor General Elena Kagan's confirmation. Think about that, 430,000 versus 170,000. Now, Elena Kagan, recall she'd also served as a senior aide in a White House. She worked for President Clinton, had a senior position there, a substantive position, actually, in domestic policy. She also, of course, was the Solicitor General of the United States, and yet 430,000 versus 170,000. So I just hope people keep that in mind when they hear about the documents. What is really relevant to me would be what he has done as a judge. He has spent 12 years on the D.C. Circuit Court, which is viewed by most as being the second highest court in the land, and he's got a lot of documents that are related to that. He has authored more than 300 published opinions. Clearly, these opinions are relevant. By the way, more than a dozen of his opinions on the Circuit Court have been endorsed by the Supreme Court, which is an unusually high number, and I think it's a testament to his outstanding judicial record. In addition to the more than 10,000 pages of published opinions he authored or joined, out of the 430 pages of documents I mentioned, the Judiciary Committee tells me they have released more than 176,000 pages of appropriate documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time in the executive branch. So there is plenty of documents to look at, and I encourage my colleagues to do so. But I think this has been, as I said earlier, based on the traditions that we have here, the amount of time spent between nomination and confirmation, based on the number of documents that have been produced, I think it's been an appropriate and a transparent process. And I am glad that Chairman Grassley has made it so. And my hope is that both from his time on the bench and his time in the executive branch, that these documents will be reviewed, the appropriate ones. Brett Kavanaugh is very well respected as a judge, and he's a thought leader among his peers, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. There have been op-eds written about him from Democrats and Republicans alike saying, I know the guy, I clerked for the guy, I've worked with the guy, I was one of his students. He's smart, he's thoughtful. He has said very clearly he's going to be guided by the Constitution and the rule of law. He understands the proper role of the court is not to legislate from the bench. He has respect for precedent. He actually wrote the book, meaning he's one of the co-editors of this book on looking at legal precedent and this issue of what they call stare decisis. So he's someone who is very much in the mainstream of legal thought and very well regarded. His former colleagues, his current colleagues, his former students, legal experts on both sides of the aisle have come out to say this about him. I think he's got exactly the right qualifications, extensive experience and a judicial philosophy that I think most Americans agree with and would want in a judge. But again, as important as that is to me, he's also a good person. He's compassionate, he's humble, he's someone who's got a big heart, and maybe most importantly, he has the humility to be able to listen, to hear people out. As we said earlier, no more important quality in a Supreme Court justice given the incredibly important issues that they have before them. So as this confirmation process continues, I hope my colleagues and the American people will get to know the Brett Kavanaugh that I know. And I hope that he is soon able to continue his lifetime of distinguished service as a member of the highest court in the land. I'm proud to strongly support his nomination for this important position. I yield back my time.